be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 33rd part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The security check was in both directions. Like the equestrian side, there was now a spiraling deck around the tree leading to the actual portal building around the tree. The building was divided in half, each section angled so that the guards in the building at the revolving door could see straight through to the tree. It was well lit with a solid roof. No one would be sneaking, or flying, through the portal without being seen by several guards. As the signs indicate, Twilight said, once they were in the building, on this side is the changing room for females and on the other is the changing room for the males. Please put on the robes you find inside, and place your clothes in a basket for storage and retrieval when we return. There is an inside pocket in the robes for your wands if you aren't wearing a wand holster. Change clothes, said George. Why do we need to change clothes, said Fred. The other new visitors were just as puzzled. Twilight smiled. This portal takes you to Equestria and there will be problems if you are wearing your normal clothes. When you go through, it will change you to a pony. However, unlike an animagus change, your clothes won't be included. You'll end up tripping and falling or otherwise hurting yourself. Or you'll ruin your clothes. The robes are to maintain your modesty during the transition, and allow you to carry your possessions without tripping you up on either side of the portal. Myrtle looked at the saddlebags she was holding and smiled. The twins looked at each other, shrugged, and went inside, followed by the other wizards. The witches went through the other door. A minute later, Harry was looking at the sign hanging overhead that said, Sweet Apple Acres. A guard at the portal regulated when they went through. He took a breath and walked into the tree. A flash of wood shot by him, then he clomped down onto all fours, the robe hanging easily on his back and out of the way of his legs. He grabbed his saddlebag in his magic and darted forward a yard to the wide nearby platform and started to remove the robe. He planned to store his wand and holster in his room while they were here. He hadn't trusted leaving his wand behind in the portal room on the other side. As he did so, the others began to come through behind him. The Weasleys and Myrtle were dumbfounded, yet again. They stared at the guard ponies in the pavilion, and at the end of the spiral walkway, all of whom were watching them. Then there were the towering illuminated walls in the background around them. That the guards all had swords and spears was startling and confusing. They were all ponies. Myrtle almost immediately face-planted, and used to being on 4 legs. Sweetie Belle and Harry quickly went to her rescue. They helped the new unicorn upright and to one side so she didn't block the portal. They stood on either side of her and used their magic to hold her up while they removed her robe and settled her saddlebags into place. Hey, said George, almost immediately after arriving, looking at his hooves. Why can't we change, said Fred, with an expression of concentration. Harry ushered the others over to the platform. The other Weasleys coming behind them made similar exclamations as they stared around in surprise. Besides being unable to transform, Harry could almost bet that they had been expecting something else entirely, something other than a well-lit open-air pavilion in a park-like setting. It was not a duplicate of the building on the other side of the portal. There was, however, a crystal dome over the tree and decking around it. The fillies and their sisters giggled at the Weasleys' expressions. Every pony moved to one side to let the other ponies transitioning go by. Twilight turned to face the wizards, and Witch smiled and extended her wings. "Welcome to Equestria," she said, echoing the print on the sign not far from the portal. "As to your question, well, two reasons. First, the portal actually changes your base form if you have enough magic when you go through it. As a result, in Equestria witches and wizards, even those who are almost squibs, are ponies just like the rest of us. She shook her head. Unfortunately, ponies do not have another form as witches and wizards do on Earth, so you can't change from it. That does not mean you can't be transformed with a spell, however. There are numerous spells to change a pony's form, but we rarely use them. Second, we have a low-level untransfiguration, anti-changeling spell in effect to prevent anyone coming through the portal from trying to fool the guards by immediately changing into something else. The Weasleys and Myrtle were staring at Twilight as if she were mad. "Wait a minute," said George, eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, our base form is as a pony?" said Fred suspiciously. "Just like the rest of you," finished George. "This is Atlantis, isn't it?" Some of the passing ponies slowed down or stopped to listen. Myrtle had braced her 4 legs and wasn't trying to walk. She didn't want to fall and miss this discussion. She listened closely as she stared at Twilight intently. Twilight frowned and looked at Harry and the fillies questioningly. They shrugged. Bon Bon and Lyra were both looking away, in different directions, feigning disinterest, Harry noticed. After dealing with the fillies on a daily basis, he could tell the 2 adults were not as innocent as they were trying to appear. Twilight sighed. "I thought it was obvious. We're equestrians on the planet Equus. The portal connects our world to yours. We are not simply another continent or island on your world." Their jaws dropped at those 4 sentences. Even Myrtle froze in place, and just hung in Sweetie Belle's and Harry's magic hold. "But our father said Dumbledore says you're from Atlantis," said Percy incredulously, the other Weasleys nodding agreement. The purple Alicorn rolled her eyes. "I haven't a clue where he came by that idea," she said. "I've never said that. Nor did any pony else." She glanced at Harry and the equestrians, who shook their heads. She sighed and started pacing. "When we first made contact, we were worried about how you might react to us. Your wizarding history books and fiction didn't exactly promise that we would be well received. Quite the contrary, actually, because we obviously aren't humans. You even forbid non-humans to own or use wands. Plus, just look at how you divide your people between muggles and magicals. So, we didn't come right out and say we were from another world. It would be risky enough if we said we were from another country. Even the prejudices I read about only being foreigners were quite upsetting. So, we just sidestepped the question of where we came from whenever it was asked." One of the guards came over and began chivvying the other ponies into continuing on the spiral decking. "Our priority is to protect Harry and the fillies in your world. And, before you ask, we were there because your world is Harry's world. We, that is the princesses and I, felt it would be better if he had a chance to see what his world was really like. After all, before his letter, he didn't know his world even had magic, so it wasn't an issue. He preferred here with magic over there without." The Weasleys nodded. They understood how it was so much better to have magic than not. Giving it up was simply not imaginable. When we discovered there was magic there, it felt only right that he should have a chance to experience it himself. It wouldn't be fair to deny him his heritage when we could easily accommodate him. Plus, then he could make an informed choice if he wanted to permanently return or not. She paused a moment. Fortunately, the magic at Hogwarts accepted our base form as human and not as pony-turned-human, and issued invitation letters to the fillies. The 3 fillies struck what they thought were inspiring poses. They looked silly. Not that Harry would ever say that. Anyway, we said we were from Ponyville and did not mention Equestria as the country we were from. We allowed you, and by you, I mean the adults we talked to think we were from another country on your world. It would be much better to be considered foreigners than non-humans." She grimaced. "But we're not diplomats, trained to watch everything we say with an eye towards keeping secrets. We made a few mistakes, such as saying we were from Equestria when Princess Luna took care of the basilisk, and that we used a portal to get here." She sighed. I knew you never had a nation called Equestria in your history, and I thought Chief Warlock Dumbledore realized we were from another world after that incident. We didn't exactly keep it a secret, especially when the teachers from Celestia's school for gifted unicorns visited for so long. I mean, the diet questions alone should have indicated we weren't humans. Not to mention our just as obvious clumsiness with manipulating things with our hands and walking. She rolled her eyes, unless he thinks all Atlanteans are naturally exceedingly clumsy. She paused and looked at the Weasleys, who all shook their heads. But how do you explain all the Greek references? Exclaimed Percy. Tartarus, centaurs, dragons, griffins, cockatrices, and chimeras. She sighed glumly. I believe that there have been other portals between your world and ours, especially one in Greece a very long time ago. All those creatures crossed over to your world, creating those legends. Or perhaps they were native to your world and fled to our world because it seemed more welcoming. She shrugged. Until we read your books, we thought all those creatures were known only to our world. The fillies and their sisters were grinning fit to end the world. The witches and wizards stared at her. Rainbow Dash stared at Percy. You mean everyone thinks Equestria is a part of the earth? She asked, incredulous. At the wizard's slow nods, she began to laugh. That's rich. She laughed so hard she had to land. And that we're people who can turn into ponies at will? She sat down laughing. Scootaloo and the fillies quickly joined her. Harry found it impossible not to grin. He had warned Twilight that the headmaster thought they were from Atlantis. The twins looked at each other, carefully. They were used to their animagus forms, but a second check was in order. They would sort that out later. After a moment, they both grinned and Fred said, "So this is Atlantis, isn't it?" and made a production out of looking around them. Yeah, the Greeks just thought they were on Earth when they really went to Equestria. They just called it Atlantis by mistake, said George. They nodded simultaneously. This is Atlantis, they declared, bumping their hooves in a pony version of a high five. Twilight looked at them, puzzled. Harry and the others simply face-hoofed. There were a few ows as a result. Hooves were a good deal harder than hands. Okay, the princess said as Rainbow subsided into giggles. This is the truth. This is an entirely different world, not Atlantis. Maybe even a different universe. Not a country or place from Earth. The portal changes magical beings that pass through it to whatever the native life form is that is of equivalent intelligence. It was quiet as the newcomers took a few moments to digest that information. Then the George repeated, "Right, that's what George said." "This is Atlantis, but you all call it Equestria," said Fred. "It's clear as glass," said George. "This," he swung a four-hoof, "is Atlantis." They grinned at the purple alicorn princess. The other witches and wizards just looked confused. Harry sighed. He knew that when they returned the twins would spread the word as far and wide as they could that the Equestrians were really and truly from Atlantis. But that the Equestrians called it Equestria. That it was on a separate world they would leave out. It would be a MSTR prank on the entire wizarding world, and also be pranking the Equestrians. The Muggles would know they were from another world, not Atlantis, but the wizards would insist they were from the continent of Atlantis, not another world. Pranking two worlds at the same time. No prank could ever top this. Thinking about it made his head hurt. Twilight hung her head and shook it in disbelief. Percy asked abruptly, "What about Spike? Why is he a dragon?" He frowned deeper. "He is a dragon here, right?" "My current theory," Twilight said, looking back up and nodding, "is that because there are magical dragons on Earth, he wasn't changed. And that we ponies changed because while you do have magical horses, ponies in your world have a different genome and are not magical. Thus, it changed us into humans, witches and wizards whose animagus form is a pony." "You mean that while we're visiting here, we'll only be ponies?" asked Ron uncertainly. "That we won't have hands?" He looked down at his four hooves, then over at his brothers and sister. He was clearly unsure of how to take that information. Twilight nodded. Yes, but that won't be as big a problem as you think. Just ask Apple Bloom. And the Pegasi use their wingtips as fingers, she said to Ginny. While the unicorns use their magic to pick up and do things, she said to the twins and Myrtle. The witch extended her wing and looked at it doubtfully. The twins and Myrtle went cross-eyed for a moment looking at their horns, then grinned mischievously. Percy sighed and rubbed his head with a hoof. Twilight grinned at him. Don't worry, you know you can use your wand to lift and move things here even though you're an earth pony. She floated his wand out of his pocket and stuck it to the cannon bone on his right foreleg. Just point your hoof at what you want to move, and use your wand to do the work, she said, floating his robe to a nearby rack. He stared down at his leg for a moment, brow furrowed, thinking. While he was doing that, Twilight repeated the process with Ron. The Fillies and their sisters had already done that and were helping the other Weasley children and Myrtle. Ron pointed at Leaf on the grass with his hoof/wand combination. It gently floated up. He grinned as he stood straight and the leaf drifted back to the grass. Well, Twilight said, breaking the Weasleys out of their contemplation of their wands, we need to move on. She turned and started leading the way, following the spiral. Rainbow darted up beside her, hovering lazily at head height, and said, "Can't I just meet you at the gate?" Twilight rolled her eyes. "No, you cannot. You have to follow the decking. And no flying until we leave the portal exclusion zone. But walking is so boring," Dash said, clomping down on the deck beside the purple alicorn. "We don't want a repeat of the changeling, do we?" "No," said Rainbow, drawing the word out, dejected. Harry felt his ears perk up. She had sent him a letter that a changeling had snuck through the portal, but hadn't said how. He suspected the increased security around the portal was because of that, but that was all. He would ask her for more information later. Seeing how much the area around the portal had changed, on both sides, Harry was very impressed. The effort they had expended in making it impossible to slip through undetected was incredible. However, based on what the others had said about the changelings, and his own suspicious nature, it was very necessary. The changelings were a very competent foe, when they wanted to be. They had, after all, managed to stay hidden for uncounted centuries. He heard Scootaloo and Ginny sigh behind him as their hooves also clomped down on the deck, following Dash's lead. He couldn't help but smirk, they'd have to walk just like the rest. It took several minutes to trot around the spiral and move through the revolving door at the end to exit the dome. Once more they were checked by security before being cleared to head for the partition wall gate. Sweetie Belle and Harry walked on either side of Myrtle to help her keep her balance, and used their magic just to keep her from tripping. Myrtle was concentrating too much on not bashing her muzzle into the ground to notice anything else. Harry thought the Weasleys didn't notice the hospital building. On the other hoof, maybe they didn't realize what it was, and what it meant to the Muggles. Plus, they were too distracted by their new discoveries to question what happened to Muggles when they went through the portal. The partition wall gate was another checkpoint. There wouldn't be any additional, dashing through the portal, trips as Sweetie Belle had done back in September. The walk to Sweet Apple Acres would have been boring if not for all the catching up the sisters had to do. It had been a rather quiet autumn in Equestria, for the main six. The final checkpoint was, again, boring. But, for Harry, it was nice to see the ponies were taking things so seriously. He knew how one simple mistake could turn into a catastrophe. He only had to think of his Cutie Mark crusades to know that. Rainbow and Scootaloo took off immediately. "Your aunts can hardly wait to see you. Come on, Scoots. I think your parents might be there, too," they heard Dash say just as the two disappeared into the dark. Which drew their immediate attention to the bright moon overhead, and the fantastic spread of stars that had been hidden by the bright lights around the portal buildings. The visitors' jaws dropped as it was driven home that they were well and truly on a different world. They came to a complete stop and just stared at the night sky. Both the full moon and constellations were unlike those that they saw on the other side of the portal. Although it was a full moon, it was hard to tell if it was 2 days past, as was the moon back home. The size and features they saw on it were completely different. And while they were used to the Milky Way stretching overhead, here different nebulae clearly dominated the sky. The Milky Way was not in evidence. As they stared, they saw several meteors streak across the sky. Then came a stunning meteor shower that made them wonder if any stars would be left in the sky. It culminated in 4 bolides that streaked overhead and exploded spectacularly. Then the smaller pieces exploded. Then exploded again. The booms took almost a full minute to arrive. Twilight chuckled and shook her head, still looking up. "Luna has certainly planned an appealing welcome home," she said, "hasn't she?" As the meteor streaks faded out, they again saw the stars in the sky. Outlined across one side of the sky were a series of easily discernible constellations that could only be all 4 of the CMC, with appropriate colored nebulae behind them. Quietly, almost too quietly to be heard, Percy asked, "Princess Luna did all that?" Harry could hear Myrtle and the twins gulp beside them. "Uh-huh," said Sweetie Belle, "ever since she returned, she's given us a different sky every night." They could hear the awe and joy in her voice as she added, "But she's never put me and the other Crusaders up there." Harry surreptitiously rubbed his eyes. He wasn't crying, there was a bit of dirt there. Twilight laughed lightly, as did Rarity and Applejack. The twins were exchanging looks and Harry heard George whisper to Fred, "And they said discord is even more powerful than that." The short trip to the Apples farmhouse was just that. Myrtle and the Weasleys spent a good portion of it tripping over every pebble and leaf of grass on the way. Except for Ginny, who kept flying into trees. They were too busy staring at the sky and spotting constellations. And contemplating the power needed to rearrange it every night. The only constant, Twilight explained as she pointed out different features in the sky, is the sailor's ship that marks the North Pole. "See the sailing ship there with a circle of 6 stars in it? The star in the middle is the North Star, Faust." She sighed softly. "That's so the ships at sea and travelers will never get lost." Granny's first words when they arrived at the farmhouse were, "Land sakes, I can see your ribs. Y'all look like you haven't eaten in days. Come on in here and eat," she promptly ordered them. The new arrivals were stunned at Big Mac's size, he made them all look small just as Hagrid did. And how thin they looked, too. All of them were barely bigger than Harry, even tall Percy. Yes, they were used to their pony appearances at Hogwarts, but they thought that was normal. They hadn't seen enough of the Canterlot group at Hogwarts to draw any conclusions, but now they could. Even Granny looked bigger than they were. The spread on the table rivaled that of the Burrow when their mom was on a cooking tear, or the house elves at Hogwarts had a special feast. Except it was all vegetarian. Not a bit of beef, fat, or gravy on the table. Instead, it was piled high with cakes, pies, tarts, and every food they could think of that had apple in its name. Big Mac and Applejack eagerly attacked the spread. "Just use your hooves to pick things up," Applejack said, demonstrating. Big Mac nodded encouragingly. They were wide-eyed at seeing the big pony picking things up with a finesse that they had a hard time believing. Hesitant, at first, then with enthusiasm, the newcomers dug into the spread. Mistakes were ignored. The others quietly laughed or chuckled at their expressions. It was a well-fed group that headed on into Ponyville later. Applejack and Apple Bloom stayed at home, of course, and Sweetie Belle and Rarity dropped out at the Carousel Boutique. The Weasleys and Myrtle were astonished at the gorgeous crystal castle that was Twilight's and Harry's home. Twilight barely had time to show them to their bedrooms before they were fast asleep. Harry knew they wouldn't have to struggle to get Myrtle to stay here over the summer hauls. The next morning Spike treated everyone to a breakfast of pancakes. The twins were vastly amused by the sight of a dragon wearing a frilly apron and serving them. The rest were just slack-jawed at the thought that a fierce dragon was happily fixing them breakfast. They spent most of the morning exploring the bright and cheerful castle. Harry spent it with Twilight and Spike. The fillies were noticeable by their absence. It sort of made Harry nervous. What were they getting into? Or planning that would get them another grounding at home? He missed them already. Myrtle, he discovered, had a camera. Apparently, one of her Ravenclaw friends had loaned her his. He had insisted she take a few pictures, to commemorate the start of her new life. And, not incidentally, perhaps capture a few candid pictures of what life was really like in Ponyville. There were still quite a few people who thought the foreigners were exaggerating. On their way to Pinky's Welcome to Equestria party later that afternoon, Myrtle was quite busy taking pictures of the unusual buildings that dotted Ponyville. The pony idea of building styles left them breathless. The styles were definitely not anything the witches and wizards had seen at home. The party itself was a surprise. They had expected something simple, a few friends of the equestrians. The reality was stunning. The party took up the area in front of Ponyville Town Hall. It definitively showed them the difference between people and ponies. They were welcomed with open forelegs and generous smiles. The numerous tables groaned under the weight of all the snacks and food. The Weasleys couldn't imagine the wizards and witches throwing a party of such magnitude for 6 strangers simply visiting Hogsmeade. At first, they thought Pinky was pranking them when she insisted on playing what they considered children's party games. But they quickly discovered that she was serious. Surprisingly, no pony said the games were silly or beneath their dignity. They just enjoyed them. Although the twins did keep trying to pin the tail on their older brother. The fillies and Ginny pulled Harry out to the dance floor, which he found oddly fun. For some reason he couldn't figure out, Myrtle always grinned at him and laughed when he happened to see her. Myrtle and the others were very amazed at the competition between the Mares for any particular stallion's attention, and that several Mares danced with a stallion at one time. Although, watching the stallions and Mares dance was unlike anything they had ever seen at home. They had expected the ponies to dance on all fours, and many did. What they hadn't expected were the ponies to dance on their back hooves, as if they were bipedal. And do so quite well. Myrtle spent most of her time beside the treats table, not trusting her legs to keep her from tripping and faceplanting over every pebble. That was on all fours. She shuddered to imagine, she told Harry, how often she would fall if she tried balancing on 2. He tried to convince her it wasn't as difficult as she thought, without success. But she wasn't alone at the table by any stretch of imagination. There was a constant crowd around her asking about the world on the other side of the portal. Scootaloo, Ginny, Apple Bloom, Ron, and Percy quickly became center stars. The ponies watched in awe at them using their wands to do magic just like a unicorn did. While the discoveries from the portal were getting a lot of press, to actually see unicorn-like magic being cast by Earth ponies and Pegasi was captivating. Then seeing the more complex spells the visitors knew, that most unicorns didn't, was positively revolutionary. The twins discovered Kindred Souls and Rainbow and Pinky as a prank war launched into full swing. Dash and Pinky found that the twins could give as well as they got, even if their magic was a bit unsteady. Which included tricking the 2 ponies into sampling their short-term gender-swap candies. All 4 were delighted at the results. The rest of the party-goers were just glad that the pranksters were focused on each other instead of them. When there weren't any adults close enough to get her in trouble, Diamond Tiara had to put in her 2 bits and called the newcomers blank flanks. Her friend, Silver Spoon, seemed a bit more cautious and hid partially behind Diamond. Is that supposed to be an insult? Fred said, staring at the filly with furrowed brows. Yes, my brother, she seems to think that not having a butt tattoo matters, George replied. They both craned their necks to look at hers. Seeing where they were looking, she turned sideways to proudly show off her cutie mark. Silver Spoon hesitantly copied her. Imagine that, George said. Where we come from, Fred said, showing someone your butt in public is considered an insult in and of itself. The 2 ponies looked horrified. Things devolved from there, and the 2 fillies found themselves burping red and gold bubbles whenever they tried to say something for the rest of the afternoon. As well as having a slight gas problem colored bright purple so no one could miss it. And became colts, to their intense disgust, after eating a couple candies that just happened to appear on the treat table just as they were looking for a bite to eat. Ponyville's residents learned to be wary that day when the twins were in sight. Ellie was surprised at how long it took the train to arrive in London, compared to her flood travel to Hogsmeade earlier in the year. Which further pounded home the fact that flood travel would revolutionize Equestria and make former Ling tactics impossible to execute safely. The train itself put the trains in Equestria to shame in terms of both speed and size. Although why they used a train instead of the Fluthem left her puzzled. Watching the countryside go by was educational as she began to understand just how many humans there were in the world. Putting those thoughts aside, she was very pleased at what she found when the train arrived in London. Just as she had hoped, Mr. and Mrs. Abbott had missed their daughter and their reunion was very emotional. While it wasn't as much as she would get from ponies in a similar situation, it was by no means a piddling amount. So, she was more than happy to stand beside them as they hugged and kissed each other. They were, naturally, cautious at meeting her, much more so than ponies. But she was beginning to understand from her time at Hogwarts that witches and wizards were not inherently as emotional. And it wasn't because witchery kind matured so much later than lings, or even ponies. It was just the way they were. Still, the Abbotts welcomed her into their home. Unpacking was quick, just a few clothes, then they had their dinner. Hannah told her parents she was starved and could eat a horse. Ellie had stared, wide-eyed, at her friend for several moments before she had realized it had been an exaggeration. Sitting at the dinner table, she practiced the table manners she had learned from the books in the library. She also basked in the warm glow that surrounded her as the parents appreciated the return of their daughter. Of course, their daughter loved being with her parents once more, too. Ellie wasn't hungry in the slightest, the scene at the station had taken care of her needs for a meal. So, the extra love was frugally stored away for future needs. If this continued throughout the holiday, she would actually have extra when they returned to the school, maybe enough to offload into a jar. She hoped it would be. She just listened as the family caught up on their news. After 4 months' absence, the love flowed freely between them. She took what she needed without anyone being the wiser. After dinner, they adjourned to the sitting room for another hour or so. Unlike the common rooms at Hogwarts, here she had a reason. For sitting near her sources of love she was a guest and it would be rude to chase her away. That she chose to always sit close to them was not remarked upon. They probably assumed it had something to do with her tragic background. Not that they could understand the true depth of her losses. When it came to the subject of her relatives, she tried to downplay it as much as possible. She wanted her backstory to be as simple as she could keep it. The fewer details she gave out, the fewer chances of someone tripping her up in the future. Or discovering that it was made up entirely. Considering it was just so tragic, according to the students at Hogwarts, it wasn't that hard to convince the Abbotts not to touch the subject. There wasn't a curfew, like at school, of course, but the others all claimed to be really tired. As a result, they retired to their rooms for the night. That she had her own room was a bit of surprise. She had expected to share with Hannah. She put up a silencing spell as soon as she could. Then she offloaded her reserves into a storage jar and put it in her trunk. It was nowhere near full, but she wanted to be ready for tomorrow. Then she took down the spell. No need to make the others suspicious at what she was doing. Breakfast was quick the next morning, as Hannah wanted to buy presents for her friends that she would see over the halls, as the witches and wizards referred to them. She could have out-ordered them at Hogwarts, but then she would have had to bring them home. It was much easier to simply wait until she arrived home. Plus, although she didn't say so, it gave Ellie an opportunity to also purchase presents while consulting with Hannah on what would be appropriate for young English witches and wizards. As a result, she spent most of the day in Diagon Alley with Hannah. The witch was more than happy to help her select appropriate presents for their friends at school. Which were mostly gifts of chocolate and small trinkets Hannah told her the others might like. Then they dropped by the Owl Mail building and sent off the presents that they didn't intend to deliver in person Christmas Day. There wasn't much love in the alley that day, despite the crowds. However, Ellie managed to break even for the day by bedtime. All in all, the halls were shaping up to be quite enjoyable for her. The wizards and witches were in one of the castle's many social rooms that evening. They had all agreed to skip dinner. The party had left them all stuffed like Christmas gooses and they could barely move. Flying was a challenge, as Ginny and Scootaloo had discovered. Even Ron couldn't force himself to eat more. The twins teased everyone about how much they had eaten. The wizards and witches were quietly discussing the day's events. Watching the sun drop and the moon rise so quickly reinforced just how powerful the two sisters were. The twins knew exactly how much power they used when lifting things with their horns or wands, and their limit was well below a ton, never mind something that dwarfed the size of a planet. Equestrian society, too, was quite different from what they had expected. Myrtle had quickly discovered that the outrageous flirting she had displayed in Hogwarts was considered pretty average by the Mares in Ponyville. In fact, she had found herself being the one to blush during most of the party. As had all the older wizards. If she wanted to compete in this world, she was going to have to step up her game. That had been the next biggest shock after finding out the truth about Atlantis, as the twins insisted everyone call the place. They even corrected the others, interrupting conversations to do so. Everyone here was very open about what they wanted, and when they wanted it. Percy had been propositioned at least 24 times. He had been more than a little disturbed that a number of them had indicated that it was a group he would be joining for the evening's dancing and conversation. Ron had been too oblivious to notice the innuendo. And Harry had been more than happy to have the Fillies and Ginny as a protective shield. Which they had been more than happy to provide. It seemed that being gone for 5 months had increased interest in him. Plus, several older Fillies considered him to be exotic now, and his British accent to be dreamy. He could only shake his head and wonder just what those Fillies were thinking. Why would they be interested in him? The twins had had Mares of their own to fend off. They had thought it was just several Mares trying to prank them. Until the Fillies had straightened them out. That had left them wide-eyed in shock and a bit shy. Which had, unexpectedly, increased interest in them. In the room that evening, Harry had reaffirmed the Fillies' claims. That left all the wizards completely silent for several minutes. Ron was disgusted. Girls were just boys in dresses as far as he was concerned, if they liked Quidditch. Otherwise, they were just plain icky. Ginny gave Harry a smirk that sent chills down his spine and a funny feeling afterwards, that made him wonder why that had happened and why did looking at the Fillies seem to echo it. Harry, Twilight said, poking her head into the room. She seemed a bit nervous as she rubbed one foreleg against the other. Could I speak to you in private a moment? Harry followed her down the corridor to another room. It was packed with books, and even had freestanding bookcases. Several comfortable reading areas were set up, allowing privacy when you wanted, but plenty of extra room in each if you were with others or working together. To his surprise, Spike was waiting for them. Twilight led him over to the dragon and gestured he should sit. Then she paced in front of him for a moment, before sitting down as well. Harry, she said. She smiled nervously and ruffled her wings. You've lived with me and Spike for well over a year now. Spike nodded enthusiastically. He also smiled. He seemed to be a bit nervous, too. You've changed a lot since you arrived. You were a small, hurt, suspicious, little colt, and you were afraid of what was happening around you back then. You trusted no pony and met everything with doubt and wariness. You expected the worst at all times. She took a breath and studied the floor before looking back up at him. I've watched you grow up since then. You've become a wonderful young stallion. You're smart, strong, and fast. You fiercely defend your friends and are not afraid to jump in when you think it's needed. You've had secrets which I don't like, but I understand why you kept them. You've stood by your friends through thick and thin. You're willing to take their punishments, or at least deflect some of the blame. Even when you shouldn't. She frowned, but perked up. You've made me very proud to know you. And proud to help you become that young stallion. Spike tried to be supportive, but his occasional eye rolls at what Twilight said made Harry want to laugh. But he was too embarrassed to do more than blush and look at the floor. Tomorrow is Heart's Warming Day. A time for family and friends to rejoice. But especially family. I've discussed this with the princesses, and with our solicitor on the other side of the portal, and they've all encouraged me to go ahead. She cleared her throat. The wizard solicitor I've talked with has said that while there would be repercussions, it's nothing serious and wouldn't affect either your parents' properties or magic. Politically, it might cause some difficulties, but nothing that would really create a problem for us. Harry stared at her, brow furrowed. What was she going on about? She sighed and looked at Spike. I'm making a hash of it, aren't I? Spike nodded. Just go ahead, he said. Dragging it out won't make it any easier. She stood straight and looked at Harry, smiling timidly. Harry, I consider you to be family. Part of my family. Harry grinned at that, happy that someone, at least, felt that way. His eyes began to water. And I hope you consider me, she glanced at Spike, who was grinning madly, us, well, we're your family. She paused and looked at Harry worriedly. You do like us as family, right? She rubbed her forelegs together nervously. Harry couldn't say anything, his throat was clogged for some reason. He nodded energetically. He blinked his eyes, trying to clear his slightly blurry sight. Spike sighed heavily. Chui, we don't want this to take all night. He turned to face Harry and stared at him intently. What she's trying to say? Spike. Twilight said, alarmed, stepping back and spreading her wings. She wants to adopt you. Harry stared at the little dragon, turning the words over in his mind as he tilted his head. Adopt. You. That meant. No, he must have misheard it. He tilted his head the other direction and frowned. Spike sighed again. Officially, really, adopt you, he emphasized. If you don't mind, Twilight anxiously blurted out, folding her wings and stepping closer. You'd be Harry Sparkle Potter, so I'm not replacing your parents. I would never want to do that. He stared at the two. Not that he could see them any more except as blurs. Twilight wants to adopt me, he thought. She wants me in her family. With Spike. Spike will be my brother. She will be my mom. She wants me in her family. He felt himself swaying for a moment. You don't have to if you don't want to, Twilight said hurriedly at his blank expression. It's just a possibility. She couldn't say anything else as Harry wrapped himself around her neck and cried, shouting, Yesiases. Harry hadn't known such joy in all his life. Someone wanted him. Someone actually wanted him. He'd been told all his life that he was a waste of space. That nobody loved him. Or even liked him. He didn't deserve friends. He didn't deserve toys. He didn't deserve presents. He didn't deserve life. He should have died years ago, with his parents. He deserved to sit in a small and dark cupboard with only spiders for company. But Princess Twilight, wanted him. In her family. She'd be his mom. He'd be her son. They Twilight, Spike, and him would be a family. Once Twilight managed to pry him off her neck, he bounced around her in sheer joy. Pinkie Pie would have been hard-pressed to match his enthusiasm. He was so happy, he felt as if he would burst. He had seen Harmony songs in action in Ponyville, and even once in Canterlot. He had even sung in the background of several as the chorus. He had never thought he would start one. Words surged through him, music swelled out of nowhere, and he began to sing. She wants me to be her son. It was only when the final chords of the chorus faded into silence that he saw the Weasleys and Myrtle staring around in shock. Everyone was in the entrance hall to the castle. The door guards turned and returned to their posts outside with a happy spring in their steps, and the maids returned to their duties just as pleased. The witches and wizards were reacting as he had the first time he had seen a Harmony song in action. staring around at every pony and asking themselves, did that really happen? What had happened? He grinned at them happily. She's gonna be my family, he said, and pointed at Twilight standing beside him, blushing. She's gonna adopt me. It'll be official and everything. He once again attached himself to her neck, hugging for all he was worth. She wrapped her wings forward to hug him back. The witches and wizards slowly began to grin in response. He could see they were happy for him. Although there were a couple of frowns as they remembered what had been said in the song about his relatives. Harry Sparkle, said George into the silence. Sparkle Harry, said Fred. No, said Princess Twilight. In Equestria it'll be Harry James Sparkle Potter, in deference to his parents. On the other side of the portal, he'll be Harry Potter Sparkle in deference to things regarding magic in the wizarding world. He leaned out of his hug for a moment and looked at Twilight. Harry Sparkle, he said firmly. Here, I'm Harry Sparkle. She smiled at him as she regarded him fondly. Officially, it will be Harry James Sparkle Potter, in honor of your BRTH parents. How you introduce yourself is another matter. Harry Sparkle, he repeated firmly, and resumed hugging her. Then stopped and leaned back again to look in her face. When? He asked. Tomorrow, before the hearts-warming play in front of the town hall. Princesses Celestia and Luna will be here tomorrow afternoon and they will sign the papers then. Harry nodded as well as one could nod when their head was firmly pressed against Semepony's neck. He knew, of course, that the princesses were doing this for Twilight and not him. But he didn't care. That it was happening at all took him to the peak of happiness. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Harry, because he was too happy to pay attention and his eyes kept watering. He wasn't sure if he imagined it, but he thought there might have been another harmony song. He spent the night with Twilight, refusing to leave his new mother's side. The others thought it was cute. The twins tried to make fun of him the next morning, sleeping with his new mum, hearth's warming day. Did the little baby sleep well with mommy last night? George teased as the Ollicorn and Colt walked into the breakfast room. Harry leaned against her side as they walked, her wing draped over him and a huge smile on his face. Her smile was only a bit smaller. Harry sighed happily. It was wonderful, he said with a dreamy expression as he stared at Twilight. Fred opened his mouth to say something, then tilted his head. He looked at his brother and shook his head. Harry was clearly far too happy with the situation to care what they or anyone else thought. Teasing wouldn't get his attention. He'd probably consider anything they said to be a compliment. It was, as far as Harry was concerned, the best hearth's warming ever. Of course, with only one other in his experience it was probably not all that difficult a feat but, still, he felt that no other hearth's warming could possibly better it. He had a family. The morning started with a pile of presents in the main sitting room, under a very festive tree. Spike gleefully served as presenter except to Twilight. Harry insisted he get to do that chore. Naturally, being a princess and local celebrity, she had the most presents. Mostly books. No surprises there. The Weasleys and Myrtle were amazed to see how closely their Christmas Day celebrations at home matched those in Equestria, right down to the festive tree with lights and decorations to match. Then there was the pile of presents each received. While they knew, intellectually, that owls must be able to get here, seeing their family's presents under the tree was still a surprise. They had expected to find those on their beds when they returned home to the castle. The new school clothes from Twilight and the other adults Harry and the fillies had received a bit of covert measuring were beyond their expectations. As were the small book bags with undetectable expansion charms. And the wand holsters for those that didn't have any. The chocolates for Harry and Twilight from their visitors were well received. Everyone laughed at the twins' antics regarding their sweaters. But the sweater for Harry was confusing to him, at first. It's Mum's way of saying you're part of the family. George explained as the others nodded. Clearly, she likes you better, because your sweater is better than ours. Fred said. Harry nodded uncertainly. He decided that he should accept the gift with the intent in which it was offered. Mrs. Weasley, after all, had been very nice to them last August. It would be in poor taste not to appreciate the effort it took to make the sweater. Also, outside of his Ponyville friends, it was the very first gift anyone had ever given him just because they knew him. Although, on a pony, it was more like one of Dudley's oversized robes than a sweater. That would change once they returned to Hogwarts, he knew. He still put it on, and used sticking charms to hold up the sleeves and prevent himself from tripping. When Spike opened his presents, the visitors were even more amazed at the gems that filled the small boxes and bags. "Chui," Spike asked with wide eyes and slightly begging expression, "can I have one now?" She snorted, but smiled. "You may have the large purple one and the small blue. Save the rest for snacks later." Watching as Spike happily chomped and chewed away at the 2 gems left the visitors speechless. The dragon was actually eating a jewel that would have been enough to purchase all their Hogwarts books back home. The others in the bags would have paid for the entire burrow. Charlie had told them they fed their dragons meat. That this dragon planned to eat a fortune's worth of jewels while everyone else watched with an indulgent and cheerful smile was simply incomprehensible to them. They could only watch, aghast, and listen to a fortune being crunched away. The explanation Twilight gave, after seeing their stunned expressions, that gems were common stones in Equestria, reduced them to incredulous silence for several minutes. When Harry and Spike offered to show them a gem field so they could collect a few themselves was simply a brain overload. Harry wasn't sure that they understood anything else that happened that morning. Harry couldn't worry himself over that, he was too distracted by Twilight's adoption of him. The real surprise of the day was the plainly wrapped present without a sender listed. Harry's name was written on the wrapping in narrow, loopy writing no one recognized. Everyone watched intently as he unwrapped it to reveal something fluid and silvery gray. It slid silkily to the floor where it lay in gleaming folds. The Weasleys and Myrtle all gasped. "I've heard of those," George said in a hushed voice. "That's really rare, and really valuable," said Fred. Ron dropped the box of every flavor beans he'd gotten from Hermione. "Is that really?" whispered Myrtle. "What is it?" Harry asked. The shining, silvery cloth was strange to the touch, like water woven into material, Harry thought. "It's an invisibility cloak," said Percy, a look of awe on his face. "I'm sure it is," said George. "Try it on," said Fred breathlessly. Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders and Ron gave a yell. "It is." "Look down." Harry looked down at his hooves, but they were gone. He looked at Twilight, who returned his astonished look. He pulled the cloak over his head. Spike gasped and said, "You've disappeared completely." The others were nodding and staring. He moved to the side and they continued to stare at where he had been. "There's a note," said Ron suddenly. A note fell out of it. Harry snatched the letter in his magic. Written in the same narrow, loopy writing was the message that Harry's father had left the cloak with whomever the writer was, and that she, or he, was now returning it. Harry stared at the signatureless note. The others admired the cloak. "I'd give anything for one of these," Ron said. "Anything." "What's wrong, Harry?" Twilight said softly. "Nothing," he said, still staring at the note. He felt very strange, conflicted even. First the adoption, now this. Had it really once belonged to his father? He had never had anything that belonged to one of his parents. And yet, Twilight had given him a family. Who had sent the cloak? Why had they waited until now? For the first time since he had first arrived in Equestria, Harry was excited as he waited impatiently for Princess Celestia and Princess Luna to arrive. His constant repetitions of, "When will they get here?" and, "What's taking so long?" throughout the morning drove nearly every pony else to distraction. That and he couldn't hold a conversation for more than a few sentences before rushing over to hug Twilight. If they could get him away from her in the first place. Not even the fillies showing up with presents could keep his attention for long. Twilight was embarrassed, proud, and happy for her new son. And a bit overwhelmed at his response. She had known he wanted a family, but this reaction was beyond the pale. He even waited outside the bathroom for her. The fillies were just as excited for Harry. They inundated him with hugs of their own to reassure him that they were not jealous of the attention he was showering on his new mom. Nor that it would change anything between them. If anything, they saw great promise in it. Which he found confusing when they said that. But his attention went back to Twilight and he quickly dismissed it. Just before lunch, Spike escorted a visitor into the sitting room. Harry immediately recognized the amber-gray pony with dark gray mane and tail, and light blue eyes. It was Filthy Rich, Diamond Tiara's father. He was sure the stallion was here to complain to Twilight about how the twins had pranked his daughter. He bowed immediately to Princess Twilight. She rolled her eyes. "Rich," she said, "you don't have to do that every time you see me." He smiled. "We must pay proper respect to your rank, Princess," he said in a slightly chiding tone. She sighed. "What can I do for you, today?" "Actually, you need not disturb yourself," he said. "If you do not mind, my business is with George Weasley and Fred Weasley, I believe." He turned to face them. He had met them briefly at the party the day before. The two eyed the obviously cultured and moneyed pony. The 3 money bags on his flank merely reinforced that notion. They nodded. "I'm Fred Weasley," said one, standing to greet the pony. "I'm George Weasley," said the other, mirroring his brother. They both bobbed their heads, as bowing was a bit beyond their training at the present. Everyone watched interestedly. Harry was impressed. He thought that for once they were giving their real names. "Excellent," said Filthy Rich, clearly pleased. "Yesterday, as I understand it, you gave my daughter and her friend a candy that actually changed them to colts for the better part of an hour. Is that true?" The twins were unsure of what to say. The pony did not seem upset, quite the contrary. He seemed almost happy to meet them. Plus, if they were in trouble, surely Princess Twilight would have mentioned it before now. "Why, yes, we did," said Fred, straightening up a bit, as did his brother. They always admitted to their pranks when confronted, and the evidence was clear that they did it. The stallion leaned forward slightly. Were those illusions only? Or did those candies really change the fillies to colts? Frowning, the twins looked at each other. Then Fred said, "Those were not illusions. The candies did reverse their genders," said George. "Boys to girls, and girls to boys." The pony frowned. "Ah, sorry," said Fred. He frowned, then said, "Colts to fillies, and fillies to colt." Filthy Rich's expression cleared and he said, "And do they work for adults, as well?" His eyes were glittering slightly and his eyebrows had risen slightly. The twins smiled. "Oh, yes, they most certainly do." They were beginning to see where this conversation was going. "Can you control how long the change lasts?" "My daughter was rather imprecise in her estimate. The ones we gave your daughter should have lasted about an hour, for her size." "For an adult of average weight?" "About half an hour." If the twins' ping-pong conversational style annoyed him, the amber-gray pony hit it well. "Can you adjust that?" Fred smirked. "Oh, yes." His brother mirrored him, from 10 seconds to all day. Filthy Rich's smile grew wider. "Is this your invention? Or is it something that is common in your world?" "Truthfully, Sweetie Belle discovered it. But we refined it. She's agreed to let us handle everything. In exchange for a share of the profits." After a startled look at the blushing filly, the business pony smiled again. "Excellent," he said, standing up straight again. He studied them, a moment thinking. "Do you have any other samples like the ones you gave my daughter?" George looked at Fred, then up at the ceiling. "We have about a dozen. I would like to purchase them all for a bit each," Filthy Rich said firmly. After Twilight translated that for them that a bit was equal to a galleon, the two readily agreed. After the transaction, Filthy Rich said, "I will be having these field tested. If they work as well as my daughter indicated, I will return with an order for several thousand of these. In the meantime," he looked over at Twilight, "I would like to leave a deposit of 1,000 bits with your highness as earnest money and to secure rights to this product." Twilight blinked, then said, "I agree to being the bailer." She looked at the stunned twins. "By my accepting this you are agreeing to make Filthy Rich the sole distributor of this product in the event he agrees to sign a suitable contract." She looked back at Filthy Rich. "There is a penalty of 10% should you cancel the arrangement without cause or take longer than 7 days to make a contractual offer." Still widely smiling, the amber-gray pony readily agreed. He hoofed over 12 bits for the candies, took them from George, and trotted out of the room humming happily to himself. He left a room full of astonished ponies. "Did that really happen?" asked Sweetie Belle, wide-eyed. The twins slowly nodded. Fred hovered 1 bit over to Sweetie Belle. "This is your percentage. We'll give you the other 20 nuts when we get home." She stared at the bit, then stuffed it into her saddle bag. The princesses surprised everyone when they came out of the Ponyville guard post, having arrived via the new FLU network instead of by chariot. They brought both Twilight's parents and her brother, as well as Princess Cadance, to the delight of Twilight and Harry. The princesses were thrilled to meet the humans turned ponies, and spent a few minutes in conversation with each of them. Princess Cadance's conversation with Ginny was a bit longer, and she smirked at Harry after it. All three were intensely interested in meeting Myrtle. The adoption ceremony took place in the early afternoon, just after a wonderful lunch with the princesses, which terrified the visitors. They were actually in the presence of the rulers of the country and the two who moved the sun and moon. Two sisters who could squash them with no more thought than they gave to stepping on an ant. They had no concept of how formal, or informal, they should be with two such personages. To say they were all on tenterhooks would be an understatement. Except Harry, he didn't want to wait for the official adoption papers to be signed. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on whether or not you were a native equestrian, the sister princesses had other obligations in Canterlot that evening. That the two princesses signed the document in front of the town hall, with Twilight's parents, her brother, and Princess Cadance signing underneath as official witnesses with their titles, of course. Moreover, almost the entire town had turned out for the princesses, and that meant they were there as witnesses, too. It was a surprise only to Myrtle and the Weasleys when a harmony song followed the signing. It was the first time in over 1,000 years that the two sisters had participated in a public harmony song, together, and the first time ever all four princesses had done so. It was a day for the history books, especially because it was in support of a small colt and not one of the princesses. It, and he, would be forever famous. Pinkie Pie refused to let the princesses leave without at least seeing the beginning of her "Harry has a new mom" party. It wasn't hard to convince Princess Celestia to delay leaving when she saw the giant cake hidden inside the town hall. Remembering the letter they had received after their first potions class, the fillies managed to get the twins to give 4 of the short-term, 30-second gender candies to the two princesses. Princess Cadance managed to convince the twins to give her 2, as well. The twins promised to follow up with a few of the 1-hour candies by owl to each of the princesses. Little did they know of the chaos they would be responsible for unleashing upon the Canterlot nobles. The twins did make sure the princesses knew that Filthy Rich was negotiating with them for rights to the candies. The smirks the princesses gave on hearing that gave Harry the impression that the rich pony would soon receive a royal order for a large number of candies. He would become even richer. After the princesses returned to Canterlot, the party continued. The party lasted until the element bearers did their production of the Hearth's Warming that evening, with Spike once again doing the narrating. Of course, being a local production, there were many bit parts for the older colts and fillies to take as background ponies. And quite a few improvised speaking parts even if it was a short, "oh, dear," or "impossible." Every pony later agreed it was one of the most joyful celebrations ever, only exceeded by the party after the element bearers' battle with Nightmare Moon and Princess Celestia's return. The following day the Hogwarts students made a trip to the gem field. It was covered in snow, but the gem-finding spell still worked. It took them most of the day to find 39 fingernail-to-thumbnail-sized gems, with a timeout for a picnic lunch. The warming charms got a good workout. Harry knew that if for no other reason, warming charms would see that wands were widely accepted and used in Equestria. That charm, and the accio for getting things that always seemed to be just out of reach. Harry and the fillies were more than happy to give the gems they found to Spike as belated hearths-warming gifts. The others decided to share their finds equally. Because they didn't know the values of the gems, there was no way to divide them and know they were being fair. As a result, they would sell the gems to the goblins in a single batch, then divide the funds. Harry had to smirk. Each share would be at least a year's wages, if not much, much more, based on what the goblins had given the fillies for theirs. The Weasleys would no longer be considered poor, and Myrtle would no longer feel as if she were a charity case. They all had sufficient funds to set themselves up after they left Hogwarts. That evening, the visitors spent their time daydreaming of what they would get with their newfound wealth. Not that they believed they would really get all that much. They insisted Harry was exaggerating what the goblins had paid. When the fillies showed up the next day, after breakfast, Scootaloo had a glint in her eye that made Harry nervous. "You know, I was thinking about Hermione," she said, hovering beside the other two. "While she'll like the bookmarks, quills, and paper we got her, I think we should get her a few books." Then she grinned. The other two nodded eagerly. They had clearly discussed this already. Harry slowly nodded. "We could visit the bookstore and pick up one or two, I think." Something else was planned, he knew. They were the Cutie Mark Crusaders, after all. Scootaloo shook head and executed a quick loop. "Nope. I was thinking we could check out the Two Sisters' castle." She grinned. "We could try for an antiquarian book Cutie Mark." Harry stared at her. They were in the main sitting room again with their Hogwarts friends. "We're not supposed to go into the Everfree, remember," he said, with what he knew was a vain hope that might derail the plan. She shook her head, again. "Nope. Ginny and I can fly there while you and Sweetie Belle can take Ron and Apple Bloom by teleport. The twins can take Percy and Myrtle, 'cause I know they'll want to explore a castle, too." The other two again nodded. "So, we won't even be close to the forest itself. And the castle is on the other side of the ravine, anyway. Plus, I remember Rarity saying that the castle itself was a safe haven in the forest," said Sweetie Belle. "None of the animals ever intruded on it." The twins were, of course, eagerly nodding their heads. Ron, Ginny, Percy, and Myrtle weren't as enthusiastic, but they were interested. He sighed. It was true. They had been forbidden to traverse the Everfree, but no pony had said they couldn't visit the castle if they didn't go through the Everfree. Harry knew he had lost this discussion. Cutie Mark Crusaders' castle adventurers were a go. But he still had to voice his objections so he could later say, "I told you so." But, he protested, Twilight already cleared out the library there when the Castle of Friendship grew. "But there might be a few in hidden rooms," responded Scootaloo. His next complaint was, "We have to tell someone we're going there so people don't start looking for us and panic." Apple Bloom grinned. "We met Pinky and told her. She said that was no problem." Fred grinned, "So, we get to explore an ancient castle?" "Just as we did back home," said George. "Only there aren't any adults around to stop us." Hesitantly, Harry nodded. The way they phrased that worried him. By Percy's expression, he too, was worried. Less than half an hour later the 10 of them were standing in front of the castle. Its looks hadn't improved much since the last time he had seen it, when Twilight and her friends had started to restore it. The foyer still had the odd 5-armed sculpture, although the arms now held stone replicas of the elements. The floor had been cleared of debris and the walls mostly repaired. The group spent a few minutes looking around the room as Harry and the fillies explained what had happened 2.5 years ago. From their expressions, Harry could see the Weasleys were skeptical. Well, anyway, this used to be Princesses Celestia and Luna's castle 1,000 years ago. After their argument, Princess Celestia felt she couldn't live here anymore and moved the government back to Canterlot, he explained. It's been empty since then. Twilight and the others started fixing it up, but then Harmony gave her the Crystal Castle of Friendship in Ponyville and they gave up the project. After experiencing several Harmony songs, the visitors were not as incredulous of the last statement as they might have been had they been told that while back at Hogwarts. Well, what are we waiting for, said Scootaloo. Let's go. She zoomed into the main hall, followed by the others. The twins' eyes were sparkling and they began trotting down the left corridor in the main hall. Look, those torches look like they're being held by hooves, came the exclamation echoing back to the rest. Harry and the rest quickly clustered around the first unlit torch on the right side corridor. Yes, said Harry. This the corridor of torches. The others stared at the lifelike hoof holding the torch. They were currently unlit. The unicorns all lit their horns to relieve the shadowy appearance everything had. The fillies started trotting down that hall and Harry hurried after them. Looking behind, he could no longer see the twins. He frowned. How had they disappeared so fast? Well, said Fred, that was unexpected. Indeed, came the muffled response from under him. They both lit their horns at the same time, bringing a bit of light to the dusty and narrow hallway. They untangled themselves and stood. Fred looked at the featureless wall behind them, searching for a way to get it to open. The hoof-held torch was the obvious trigger, so he pulled on it. It refused to move. Ha, he said. That was what flipped us the first time. Come on, said George, as he started down the hall, let's see where this goes. Fred followed behind him, and cast a vanishing charm on the floor before the dust overwhelmed them. He carefully examined the walls for peepholes or door triggers as he walked, as did his brother. The peepholes only showed them empty rooms to either side of the narrow secret corridor. But no doors. Distracted by searching for a door to either of the rooms beside the narrow corridor, they didn't notice the trapdoor in the floor until they fell down it. Percy, Myrtle, Ron and Ginny wandered down the much brighter and wider main hall. They could see twin banners in the distance above and behind the split-pair staircases to the next floor. It didn't take them long to discover the library, between and under the stairs. It was a large room with many empty bookshelves. The lighting came from floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a large courtyard with a fancy fountain, now dry. The four saw nothing of interest, at first. The furnishings were in surprisingly good shape, with what they assumed were comfortable sofas and chairs scattered around the room. In front of them, or beside, were various reading tables. One table had something that looked like a Ferris wheel with 7 flat platforms instead of chairs beside it. It was only a bit taller than they were. It was too small to be for ponies, although foals in a basket might fit. It took a few moments, but then they realized it was so a researcher could have 7 books open at the same time without taking up a ridiculous amount of space. Myrtle grinned, and one shrinking charm later she was placing the item in her saddlebags. I found my present for Hermione, she said brightly. I'll see if Twilight doesn't mind, first, of course, she added. Careful searching of the room revealed a hidden passage that led to another, cozier library. Unfortunately, it had already been cleaned out. Only a few tables and chairs remained. It was as spotlessly clean as the main library, indicating that if it had had books, then Princess Twilight had probably already found and removed them. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 34. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye. Asasasak.